Welcome to this episode of Keeping It Green. I'm Erin LaFave, your co-host, and today's guest is Kerri Kiernan, herbalist who runs the company Prairie Apothecary. Thanks for joining us today, Kerri.
Thank you, Erin.
What are we going to do today?
Well, today we're going to talk about making herbal salves.
What is a salve?
A salve is basically a topical mixture that you can put on your skin. So it's a mix of oil and beeswax to harden it. And the oil can contain medicinal herbs or can simply be something nice that you can use to moisturize your skin.
What types of oils can we use?
Well, there's lots of different oils you can use, and the ones I prefer to use for salve making generally are affordable and easy to find in the store. So one thing that I really love using and I always stock up on when I find it on sale is organic olive oil. And one really important thing you want to do when you're making salve is to make sure that you're using oil that's cold pressed. So usually you can find that somewhere on the bottle. So extra virgin olive oil doesn't have to be organic, but I generally prefer to use.
And what is cold pressed?
So cold pressed means that the olives are basically pressed for their oil instead of using a chemical to extract the oil. You just don't want any additional solvents or anything left in your product.
Great. Other kinds of oils?
So other oils I love to use, especially if you're making like a body cream or something like that, is coconut oil. And it's really easy to infuse herbs in coconut oil. The only thing is that it does harden up. So it's nice to keep it on like your heating vent or something like that to keep it liquid. A few other oils you can use I want to talk about is grapeseed oil. So right now grapeseed oil is really inexpensive. And again, you want to find cold pressed or organic. Sometimes it's cheaper than the olive oil. And I like to use grapeseed oil for products on the face because it's a little less greasy and soaks in a little quicker.
Yeah, olive oil seems like it would be too much.
Yeah, so
But it's actually nourishing?
It is. Okay. It's moisturizing, but it just takes a little longer to soak in. So think like a healing salve, maybe something for an itch, something on the body, more practical, medicinal stuff, olive oil. That's your basic. Coconut oil, you're getting a little fancy, body care products. And then the grapeseed oil, maybe something for the face or scalp.
What types of herbs do you infuse in the oils?
Depends on what you want to make. So the most common salve that people make is called a healing salve. And you can probably find it in a local health food store, or if you look online and type in healing salve, you're going to find a lot of the same herbs. So those herbs are plantain, which is a weed that grows all over in the Eau Claire area, so easy to find if you learn how to identify it. Chickweed is another one. Also St. John's wort, so we use the flower. Comfrey is used in a lot of plant medicine. You can find a lot of folklore about comfrey. And once you've got it, you can't get rid of it. So that's a good one to grow in your garden.
How do you do the infusion and what do you need to do that?
I'd like to show you a little bit of how to do that because it's nice to have a visual. For doing the infusion, today I actually brought cayenne. So what I have is the seed, and really you can use any kind of hot pepper. Obviously you don't want to use something extremely hot because it's a little unnecessary, but what you're looking for is the capsaicin. And you can use a whole pepper, you can chop it up and put it right in your oil. But for today I wanted to make it easy, and this I purchased in the bulk food section of a local store. And it has the seed in it, so you want to make sure you have the seed. You don't want to get pepper powder. A, it's going to be hard to strain and get that powder out, and B, you don't know if some of those volatile oils have evaporated or escaped. It's nice to get the plant in its whole form, if possible. So what you want to do is you want a clean, sterile jar, and I find an easy way to do that is in a crock pot. You can just put it in hot water. The only problem is you need to have it completely dry before you put your oil in. As you know, that sort of the problem with putting in fresh plant material into oil is you have water, so you need to get rid of that oil. If you start with a dry product, it's a lot easier, no water. So make sure your jar is dry. If you're using a dry plant material, all you really need to do is fill your jar about halfway with the dry material, and then you're going to cover it with your oil. If you're using a fresh product, say that we chopped up some fresh cayenne here and put it into our jar, you would just cover it barely with the oil. And that's because this is a lot more concentrated than something fresh. So just think, if it's a fresh plant, cover it entirely with your oil. If it's dry, you don't need to use as much. You can save a little bit. Fill it half with plant material, fill it the rest of the way with oil. And you've got two options for how you're going to store it. So if you're using dry, you don't have to worry about letting any water escape. I can fill it up, cap it, label it, and make sure to check on it every now and then. And you're going to keep it in here infusing for at least 6 weeks. Now, if you want to use fresh plant material, you're going to do this a little differently. You need to make sure that the water can escape. And so as simple as taking a piece of paper towel, putting it around, you can use the lid to a mason jar, and you just simply cover it. So I'm not covering it up right now, but that's all you would do. You could even just tie it. And what happens is that the water is able to escape, but you're not losing anything valuable. If you happen to see that there's bubbles forming at all, air escaping from the plant as it's breaking down, or water, you can shake it. Or you can use a chopstick or something to help release those bubbles. So why would you maybe want to deal with the fresh plant material? It's more work, yes. Well, you get a much stronger product. So if you take a look at 2 oils side by side, if I had one with my dry cayenne and my fresh cayenne, the fresh is actually going to be a much richer colored oil. It's going to smell a lot more like pepper, but it takes more work. You're risking that mold growing because of the water, but if you kind of take care of it, you end up with a really nice infused oil. Okay. So if you're just starting, you probably want to start with dry plant material since it's easy. But there are a few plants that I recommend only doing fresh, as I've seen that using the dry plant material really results in nothing that great. Mm-hmm. So one of them is the St. John's wort, and that's a yellow flower that grows around here. And if you use it when it's dry, you can notice that the oil doesn't turn red. But if you use a fresh plant, the oil actually turns red.
Well, I think anybody can start with some of these tips that you've given us.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do you do once the oil is ready?
An easy thing about using the dry material is that you know within at least 6 weeks it's going to be ready to strain. However, because it's dry, you don't have to worry about mold, so you could leave it in there up to 6 months. And sometimes you will notice that the oil will actually begin to break the plant down. The leaves will look really wilted, the color of the oil will be very rich. Again, you can smell it. It's kind of you want to use your senses to see that the oil is ready. Mm-hmm. If it looks like the plant material isn't breaking down at all, you can even think about moving it into an area with a little bit of heat, and that might help it.
So then once everything is infused, or in other words, soaked for weeks, maybe even months, mm-hmm. then how do you strain it?
So straining, I've done a lot of experimenting with this. I've even bought some fancy presses. And what I've found is that the most simple way to strain is the easiest and the cheapest. So for me, I simply use a funnel and a coffee filter.
That's simple.
Simple. So what you would do is, again, you would want a clean, sterile jar. So say we're starting with this. And if you've got a funnel like this that has a larger opening on the bottom, you're going to want to tape the filter onto the strainer. So I've got some tape ready here. Again, sometimes you learn these things from experience.
Because the materials might be so heavy, it'll maybe
plop
fall
through.
Okay.
Exactly. And again, you do want to make sure you're labeling everything that you're doing. And I've already got this labeled. So what we're going to be straining is some coconut oil that had cacao infused into it. And this is actually about 6 months old. It's really rich, really, really concentrated. And the smell of the cacao with the coconut is really delightful.
Cacao, is that like chocolate?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
So it's actually raw. I got it while traveling straight from the country where it was produced. So this is a really special batch of the medicine we're making today.
I can't wait to smell it.
So the thing about coconut oil, as we know, is it hardens when it's at room temperature. So this straining right now is maybe a little more advanced than completely beginner, but you can imagine if you had your jar of olive oil, it would already be liquid. And this, again, is the mix of the plant material and the oil. So one thing I want to be careful of, again, an easy mistake that can happen, you don't want to mix water and oil here where you don't have to, is since this was in the water, it's got water on the outside. So we're going to want to make sure to dry it off before I dump it in.
Because the water could trap in like bacteria that would make mold.
Exactly. Since this is finished, we're going to strain it. It's going to be in here and I'm going to cap it. We don't want water in there. Otherwise, we're going to ruin about 6 months of work.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So here we go. And I don't pour it all in right away. I go slow. And pretty much with this process, you will want almost a full day. Right away, oil is going to start dripping through. But gravity is going to do most of the work here. Rarely do I even squeeze what's left in the filter because if you happen to use fresh plant material, you don't want any of that coming through. Dry is not so much of a worry. Like I said, I used to press the remaining plant material to get every drop of that oil out, but I found that I had a little bit of things going off because of doing that. So really you want to put this on the side of your kitchen, let it drip. Once it goes down a bit, maybe add a bit more in. You just leave it, and then I'll cover it with a plate or something to make sure there's no dust or anything getting in there. And again, it's good to get your label on your jar right away, because if I happen to dump this all in there, put it in the dishwasher, walk away, oops, did I remember what the date was on that, what's all in it? Really good to make sure to label everything right away. Oh, the next step would be to make some salve. So before you start doing anything, you're going to want to measure everything. First, I want to show just an example of a salve here. So you want to have a container ready. Here is a metal container, and the salve is inside. So it's, again, a hardened oil, basically. And we use the beeswax to harden it. You want to have your beeswax also measured out ahead of time. So here we have a type of beeswax that's already in little tiny pieces, little pellets, which makes it really easy to melt down. And in your salve making, this is the part that's going to take the longest. So if you just took a big hunk of beeswax and put it in your water, you're going to be waiting a while. Another thing that we're putting into our salve, a type of oil, but it's hard right now due to room temperature, we have a cocoa butter. And again, I have it measured out ahead of time. The rest of our ingredients are going to be our liquid oils. So the balance of liquid oil to wax generally is 1:8. And this is really easy to do if you make a cup of salve at a time. And this is going to give you a really nice consistency. It's going to be maybe a little hard, say for like a body cream. So for today, our cacao here, our cocoa butter, is counting as part of our liquid. Since we are going to be making 10 chopsticks, I already know ahead of time how much liquid that's going to be. And I have 1 part beeswax, I have 1 part the cocoa butter, and the rest is oil. And our 2 types of oil today are what we had already strained, our cacao and coconut oil, as well as we have an herb called Damiana.
Damiana?
Yes.
Never heard of it. Does it grow around here?
No, it doesn't, but it's really easy to find online as well as in some local health food stores. And Damiana, you actually use the leaf. And so I had infused the leaf in oil, and since I used dry, I infused it for a very long time, and the oil is extremely fragrant.
Let me smell. I'm curious with Damiana. It's very bright green.
Very bright.
It's very earthy, would you say? It's not sweet, it's not spicy. Can you tell us a little bit more how we melt the beeswax?
Sure. So there's a lot of ways to do this with lots of expensive and fancy gear that makes it easy, but you can do this at home with things you already have. So what you're going to need is a double broiler, and basically what that is some water boiling on the bottom and another container inside that you're going to melt the wax in. One way that I love to melt wax is to put it in one of these heat-safe glass measuring cups, because it's got a little spout on the end, and then I can go straight from my melted product here to pouring it in the finished container.
Rather than pouring it into another container with a spout.
Exactly. So every time you switch the hot mixture from container to container, you're losing a little bit. It gets stuck to the side.
Yeah.
Exactly. and it's kind of a mess to clean up, which is another thing I should mention. So anything you're going to use in salve making will continue to be what you use for salve making and nothing else. Because once you get beeswax on things, it's a little hard to completely remove it. But here I have just an older little boiling pot, and maybe you could pick up some extra things just from the thrift store just for salve making.
Now I see you have something underneath the cup.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? What's the purpose of that?
So normally in a double broiler, this bowl here is resting on the edges of the pot. So it's preventing the bottom from going right on the heat, which would be a little intense for our product. We don't want to use too much heat on it. In other words, we don't want to cook out all the goodies that we infused into it. So instead of putting my glass directly on the bottom, I just take a lid from a mason jar, and I put it on the bottom, and then I put the cup right on top.
So you elevate it just enough so we can get a melting effect, but not a cooking effect.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Again, so if you don't purchase the already pelletized beeswax, for example, if you get a nice big brick of beeswax from a local beekeeper, which is wonderful to do, if you do take this route, I find the beeswax has still got a little bit of honey in it, maybe some propolis, and it smells so wonderful. Just takes a little more work. So you're going to need a grater, or here I have, this is more kind of for cheese, and you want to make your wax grated up ahead of time. You don't want to be doing this as your water is boiling.
It takes some time to get it from that brick form. That's why it's nice that they make it in the little pelletized form too.
Exactly.
Do you find that one is more expensive than the other because of that they've put it in pellet form?
I find it's about the same, but I do find a pretty big difference in the quality of it.
Okay.
So the pelletized wax is going to have a lot less smell to it, and is going to be, have less in it, less of the honey. So maybe you want that depending on the product you're making. If you're making something you want to be really clear, really light, then that wax is really great. But if you want something really rich, a little heavier, thicker, the other beeswax is good as well. So what you're going to start with first is just your wax, and we have a very small amount today, so it's going to go pretty quickly. And move it onto the heat. This might get a little bubbly. And you're going to want to make sure that you're stirring the beeswax once it starts to melt, as that'll help it. So I'm going to give you that job, Erin.
Okay.
So it is starting to melt right now. This might move nice and quick. After your beeswax has melted, then you're going to add your other oils to the mixture. Sometimes when you add the other oils to the mixture, since they're sitting at room temperature, it's going to harden up again, but you just keep stirring. And the thing you really want to focus on is that as soon as it hits liquid, you want to take it off that heat, because the less heat we have on our infused oils, the better. You don't want to cook them. So you're doing good.
Good.
And as you continue to stir,
It's stuck on the spoon.
that happens. So when we add in the rest of our oil,
Okay.
we're just going to get it as melted as possible, as it's reducing the time that we have our other oils on the heat.
What do you think?
It's looking pretty good. So I'm going to measure out the last part of our oils here. Actually, we can add in our cocoa butter. So this is going to melt pretty quick.
But this is considered part of the liquid.
It is, actually. Okay. It is. It's not nearly as hard as beeswax. Say you did your 1:8 ratio and use this as your solid, your salve will not harden.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes if you want to make your salve a little softer and you don't want to use that full 1 part of wax, you can replace some of it with some cocoa butter or, say, shea butter, something like that. All right, so I'm going to add this in, and we'll see if it hardens back up or not. And as soon as these are liquid, then we'll put in our oils. So you start with your most solid ingredients and work down to just adding your oil.
Oh, that's a good tip.
Mm-hmm. So we're making a pretty small amount of product right now, so it's going to melt down pretty quickly. Sometimes if I'm making a real big batch, this part can take 15 to 20 minutes. So it is nice to have a friend.
15 to 20 minutes isn't too bad, I would say.
No, it's not too bad. I mean, that would be if you're making salve for the whole family, all the extended family for Christmas or something.
Oh, wow.
Which is a great idea.
Yeah, that is a great idea.
Yeah.
This is melting pretty quickly.
So our recipe today, we have, again, 1 part beeswax, 1 part cocoa butter, and 8 parts liquid, which is our oil. And so I split that up between our cacao and the Damiana. So I have 6 parts Damiana already measured out. And then that leaves us just 2 parts of the cacao and coconut. So I'm going to quickly measure that into the container here.
Should I take it out that it's melted?
That's fine because that's just our beeswax and our cocoa butter, so we don't need to worry about overheating. The only stuff we want to really worry about overheating is the infused oils. So I'll add this in just a moment.
And for
Sorry,
those viewers
don't do that.
that can't smell through the television, this smells amazing. It smells coconut and kind of chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
What else? No beeswax in there. Now, if we wanted to add some more scent, add some essential oils, and essential oils would be, for an example, a lavender.
Most definitely. Careful that doesn't get, there we go. All right, do you think it's ready for adding this in? Yep. And we may have to put it back over the water if this solidifies it, and it did a little bit. So I'm going to make sure that, yep, and we're right at our mark for the exact amount we need. Okay, so we can put that back in.
Solidify just a little bit.
Just a little bit. So we're just going to remelt it. You had asked about essential oils. So I love putting essential oils in products, especially topical. Since the chapstick's going on the lips, I usually don't put too much essential oil in besides maybe a mint. I don't want to make it overly fragrant, especially with this recipe. If you do use essential oils, you don't want to add it to the hot mixture. You don't have to. Again, you want to be careful with using too much heat because that might sort of cook out all the goodness from the essential oils. You want to put the essential oils directly into your finished container. So whenever I make salve, I will have all my tins laid out, ready, and I will go around and put a couple drops in each one of whatever essential oils I want. Some people will add the essential oils to the mixture once they take it off the heat, if you know ahead of time how many drops you need. And generally, if you're making a cup, so the 1 to 8 part, a cup is 8 ounces, so it's going to be a cup and a little more. You're going to put about 10 to 20 drops of essential oil is a good place to start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about these ingredients on the lips? Are these food grade? I mean, some of these items we eat, cooking and baking.
Exactly. So that is a good thing to keep in mind. The infusions I did for this oil was all dry. So I know there's no risk of mold instead of using a fresh infusion. And yes, the cocoa butter is food grade as well as the coconut oil and the grapeseed oil. Good question. All right, how's it look?
I think we're at the liquid stage.
All right, so you can keep stirring to make sure we get all the product off the spoon, get that to melt. And again, it's all about having everything ready, pre-measured, and ready to go, especially your containers. So here I've got my chapstick containers, and I've got them lined up. Now there's lots of fancy apparatuses you can get to help you pour into your chapstick containers, but it's really simple, especially when you've already got your measuring cup with this little lip. You really don't want to overfill, and you want to fill slowly. So again, I'm going to make sure that we don't have water on the outside of this, so we don't want that going into our mixture. And we're simply just going to fill. So it smells really good. Yeah.
It's going to be a nice lip balm.
There's other things you can add into your lip balms if you like. You could put a little vitamin E, that's always nice. Again, we talked about the essential oil, so I'm going nice and slow with this.
And we could use other containers, like small canister or small tins, and then you would just apply it with your finger. We see those in stores.
Yeah.
This is a nice way to do it as well.
So I've kind of moved up in using these containers. I just found that the people I was giving my lip balm to, who I put in those small little containers that use your finger, they just sort of communicated to me that they wanted to have the push-up tube. So you can find these online for very, very inexpensive. Or I want to re-say that. You can find these online for very low cost. So
Could you reuse the containers after you were done?
Most definitely. You would have to be a little careful as these are plastic. But with if you use a tin or glass, I always reuse my products, my containers. So if you wanted to reuse these, you could put them in the dishwasher. Otherwise, you're just going to need some nice hot water to wash these out to get all the way down. And you can always go back and top them off. We'll see how our measuring was in the beginning to see how we fill these up. And if you have a little more or a little extra, that's okay. Sometimes it's nice to have another tube on hand just in case you've got a little extra. I don't know if I'm going to go for this last one. I think I will, because we might remelt this a little bit. As you can see, a little bit has hardened. If we heat this up again, we would probably be able to fill this last one all the way. So we can do one more time.
It's just clinging to the sides.
It is.
Cooling.
It is.
Okay.
And we'll do that later. But these containers are very small. These are about 1/4 of an ounce, I believe, each. So our total recipe for doing 10 of these was only about 2 ounces.
That's
give or take. It was just over 2 ounces.
Very inexpensive to make.
Extremely.
When you're using this amount.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And everything we did today, I just did visually with the measuring cup, looking at volume. So this is something you can really just do in your kitchen. You can get very technical with it as well if you have a nice kitchen scale. You can measure everything out. So if you really get into making products and you're making a lot, you might want to do that, and always be sure to write down everything you do.
Because you never know what batch worked better than the other.
Exactly.
Okay.
And sometimes I'll even mark, this is lot number 2 of doing this, so that when I come back to make it again, I know exactly what was in each one, if I need to make any adjustments, or if I know that that one batch made 9 1/4 and maybe we can melt out a little bit more.
Or if it hardened to a consistency you liked or didn't like, then you can adjust next time.
Exactly. So since I've already made this recipe, I know it was going to turn out. But if you're doing this for the first time, there is a step you can do in the midst of the salve making to make sure you have the consistency you want. So when we had melted the product all the way down and it got to liquid, what you could do is take a spoon and dip it in there and then put it in the freezer. Just give it 30 seconds to a minute, take it out, and then you can test the consistency.
Well, thank you for teaching us how to make salves.
You're welcome. If you're interested in learning more about herbalism and how to grow and use medicinal plants, you can get involved locally. So we have a community garden downtown and a demonstration herb garden. You can get involved by emailing eauclaircommunitygarden@gmail.com, and you can also connect with me through my website, which is riverprairieapothecary.com.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Keeping It Green. We learned a lot today about salves, teas, and medicinal plants from Kerri Kiernan of River Prairie Apothecary. Join us next time on Keeping It Green.
Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the web at www.cvctv.org.